But when he booms, he booms. Yeah, week 1, we got that 30% target share. Everybody thought, oh my God, is this the awakening of J-Mo?
If you had to pick just one QB stat to predict who wins MVP this year, it might be adjusted yards per attempt.
But man, I've got him at QB 15 this weekend with 6 teams on bye.
But you still have Jawan Jennings ranked behind Deebo Samuel. Why? Why? Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to go through our rankings, risers, fallers, Freedman's favorites, and of course, Dwain's Sicko Starts ahead of what should be hopefully a good week 12. Certainly do have some, maybe not so good Thursday night football going on, Browns Steelers. And as a Columbus, Ohio native, I'm just going to say, guys, if Cleveland looks anything like Columbus this morning, we could be in for some snow, wintry conditions, maybe a Najee Harris game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Of course, I have 2 other friends on this very show, Dwain The Rock McFarland, as well as Matthew Freedman. Dwain, guessing it's not snowing in Texas.
Yeah, it's not, but I had to turn the space heater on in the office for the first time, Ian. It smells like all that dust in there cooking. It smells pretty terrible in my office right now, so I had to turn it off. But yeah, look, I'm looking forward to some I would love some snow on the field for a football game, in November. I'll take it.
Freeman, I'm pretty sure it never stops snowing in Vermont. New Hampshire.
That's true. New Hampshire. New Hampshire and Vermont, they're like cousins. The states basically look the same, except one's just flipped upside down. But yes, it will be snowing shortly in New Hampshire, which is great for ski season. So looking forward to that.
But Freedman, where are you right now?
I'm in Texas. I'm about 5 miles from you, Dwain.
Yeah, little known fact, guys. Freedman and I, we never knew each other growing up or anything. And we both work in the fantasy industry at the same company, and we're from the same town. This is insanity. Yeah. It's me, Freedman, and Kelly Clarkson. We're all from the same place.
Yes. What a pipeline for talent there. Just, in that order as well. All right, guys, let's get into some of the goodness we have today on the show. Starting off with an update from Andy Reid on the suddenly getting healthier Chiefs backfield. Obviously, Kareem Hunt has been a workhorse for the better part of the last 6 weeks. But that said, Isaiah Pacheco could be returning from that fractured fibula. He was a limited participant in practice on Wednesday, seemingly on track to suit up Sunday against the Panthers. Guys, a specific quote from Reid on his backfield. We'll find a way. Both of them are good players. We'll find a way to get both of them in. If and when that takes place, that is a good problem to have. Dwain, good problem for the Chiefs to have, not so much for fantasy managers.
Yeah, not so much for fantasy managers. And it really stinks because guess who they're playing? They're playing the Carolina Panthers, who give up 6.9 points per game over their opponent's average to the running back position. That's the number 1 matchup in fantasy for running backs. So I think Kareem Hunt still stays active in this game, even if we see Isaiah Pacheco. I can't tell you how much, though. I mean, we never really know. We have no clue what the coaches are going to do in these scenarios. I would anticipate some sort of a split, but I am leaning towards Kareem Hunt still having a slightly larger role than Isaiah Pacheco this week. Again, guys, I could be wrong, but I have Kareem Hunt as a low-end running back 2 because the matchup is just so good. I've got Isaiah Pacheco as a mid-range running back 3. It could easily be flipped from those 2 things. I'm kind of going off of what happened with Tony Pollard, which is like the most recent case I remember with a similar injury. Also what we saw from Mark Andrews last year, obviously a different position. So I'm being a little bit conservative with Isaiah Pacheco out of the gate. Hopefully, though, he's not going to have the lingering issue that those guys had, and maybe his body responds differently to the surgery. So we'll see how it goes. Like I said, low-end running back 2 for Hunt for me, and then mid-range RB3 for Pacheco. If for some reason Pacheco doesn't play, though, Ian, man, then we've got Kareem Hunt moving up to like mid-range running back 1 territory because this is a smash matchup.
Panthers have indeed allowed the most PPR points per game to running backs. And as Dwain said, that is also just over their average as well. So hopefully it is just between these 2 guys. Obviously, Samaje Perine has remained involved on 3rd downs. Carson Steele a little bit in short yardage situations as well. So Freeman, as much as I would love here and look at literally any stat that measures running back performance and say Isaiah Pacheco has clearly been much better than Kareem Hunt this season, this is Andy Reid and the Chiefs. I'm not so sure they share the same view. Almost reminds me of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple years ago where we had Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones. And yeah, Rojo actually was the more efficient running back in a lot of different ways. But guess what? When you don't have the overarching trust of your quarterback and your coach, sometimes that just doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And with Andy Reid, this is now an offense that is predicated less on explosive plays and more on just down-to-down success. And with that, you could talk yourself potentially into saying, okay, well, Kareem Hunt is good enough and we can give him enough opportunities in each game to where we want to keep him involved. So I think I'm just going to be a little skeptical that we see Pacheco this week. Maybe this is hope versus reality, but normally when guys are returning from IR, they get in some full practices before they actually play. We need to monitor the injury report for the rest of the week to see if Pacheco actually does get in some full practices. Right now, he hasn't. So I still think we see one more week of Kareem Hunt, despite the coach optimism that we have right now, but we just have to wait and see. And I echo what Dwain said earlier. If we do see Pacheco play, I think he's, in that flex area. I think Kareem Hunt is like the RB2, RB3 in that range. If Pacheco is out, you're obviously starting Kareem Hunt, and like he does have the capability of having like 25 touches in this week with multiple touchdowns.
As always, I invite you guys to check out Dwain and myself on this very show on Friday, where we go through all the injury relevant news to be ahead of before the weekend. I'm sure we will be talking about this once again. So that was not the only news, though. From Wednesday, I do have a handful of other items I want to run through before we get into the meat of our show. Starting off with some quarterback news. We did have Kyle Shanahan say the 49ers do not have much concern over Brock Purdy dealing with that right shoulder ahead of week 12. However, the fantasy community does have a lot of concern with Kyle Shanahan's injury updates, so we will believe it when we see it when he is out there. But tentatively, yes, we are expecting Purdy to play. Similar notion with Jalen Hurts, listed as limited with an ankle injury, but he did tell reporters as part of a, quote, mini program to be healthy for the stretch run, and he will fully practice in the next few days. Over at running back, Raiders RBs Alexander Mattison and Zamir White both not practicing with ankle and quad injuries, respectively. Could be a lot more Amir Abdullah and Dylan Lave if they are indeed sidelined. Also, Dave Canales and the Panthers have, quote, high hopes for Jonathan Brooks playing this week with a knee injury. Might have to have a bigger workload than anticipated, starting off with Miles Sanders already ruled out. That said, maybe it is just a Chuba Hubbard workhorse role. More on that tomorrow. Titans running back Tajay Spears not practicing with a concussion, so should be a true 3-down workload for Tony Pollard this week. Also, Packers running back Marshawn Lloyd. Yes, he is off the IR, but he is already back on the reserve/non-football illness list due to an appendectomy. Ouch, get healthy, dude. Over at wide receiver, Bucs wide receiver Mike Evans expected to play per Diana Rossini. Love to see it. Tyreek Hill still limited, but once again expecting to play through that wrist injury. Brandon Cooks had his practice window open. Not like that's going to exactly save the Cowboys season, but will be good to see him out there again. Adam Thielen also limited as well now that he is eligible to come off IR. Darius Slayton cleared a concussion protocol, which is good. And another Andy Reid update said Hollywood Brown, quote, is making very good progress. He's another one who's excited to get out there and get going. I know some of my best ball squads would certainly appreciate a late season return from Hollywood, but we will see again what kind of timeline we're dealing with there. At tight end, George Kittle did say, I will be playing on Sunday. Great to hear. Also, Sam Laporta practicing in full through that shoulder injury, so presumably putting him on track to suit up this Sunday. And Cowboys tight end Jake Ferguson, unfortunately, not practicing with a concussion. Mike McCarthy even said, again, not looking great for this weekend. And finally, guys, we did have a PPR update per Tom Pelissero. A pass from Drake May to Demario Douglas for no gain was actually nullified by penalty, so the NFL corrected it. I pray for anyone out there who won by one single point with Demario Douglas in that lineup. That is the stuff of fantasy nightmares. So that was the news, everyone. But before we get to the rankings, I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground in football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets instantly. And you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's Rankings Thursday over here at Fantasy Life, and accordingly going through all the positions, kicking things off with quarterback. Shout out to the YouTube fam. You guys can see our top 12 consensus rankings right here, and you can check out the full list over at FantasyLife.com. But yes, starting off with the top 6, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, usual suspects, but Justin Herbert and Bo Nix rounding out that top 5, and those good matchups against the Ravens and Raiders respectively. Kyler, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield returning from a bye and getting Mike Evans back, rounding out the top 10. And then we have Patrick Mahomes against the Panthers. And yes, Anthony Richardson, welcome back, rounding out the top 12 there in that, I would like to think a potential sneaky shootout against the Lions, or maybe they'll get the doors blown off them. Either way, hopefully Richardson runs the ball a lot and racks up those fantasy points. But Dwain, want to start things off with that QB4 right there. Justin Herbert playing as well as any quarterback in the league right now. I mean, since returning from that bye week, only Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Bo Nix have more fantasy points per just overall fantasy points than Jim Harbaugh's QB1. So expectations for Herbert ahead of what should be a pretty great matchup Monday night against the Ravens.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is, Justin Herbert's healthy. He wasn't healthy for the first part of the season. We saw a very run-heavy approach from the Chargers. Obviously, we've got a coaching staff that's known for running the ball, but now we're really more of that, if we were playing Madden, Ian, to be that run-balance playbook or balance playbook versus being run-heavy. So if you look at it since the bye week, before the bye, they were at 49% drop back rate. Now they're at 58%. And if you look at their drop back rate over expected, which you can find at FantasyLife.com, check out the utilization tools under team styles. And what that tells you is at the play level, with the score, the down and distance, all the things, it compares them to the rest of the league and what's happened over the last 4 years. So you really get a feel, okay, what is the league doing in the same situations, right, that the Chargers have been in? And they have been in positive territory since the bye, which is just really big news. So healthy, now slinging the rock around more. You've got Ladd McConkey, who we love. You've got Quentin Johnson really having a nice second-year rebound. We've got Will Dissly out here in these streets looking like a tight end one. So the Chargers passing attack looking really healthy overall, very they've been very efficient. And then you add in the fact that they're playing the Ravens. Anybody that's playing the Ravens is going to somewhere be in this show, whether it's going to be Freedman mentioning it or it's going to be me. We're going to be mentioning the quarterback, a receiver, a tight end, something, because they have the worst secondary in the NFL. I know it still sounds a little weird to say, but we're at that point. We're heading into week 12. They give up 20.2 fantasy points per game just through the air to quarterbacks. That's before we add anything in on the ground. That is by far the most in the league, obviously giving up the most passing yards per game in the league at 305. We've got a nice game total. This should be a fun game. And then the one other thing, Ian, they're really good against the run, only giving up 77.5 yards per game on the ground, one of the best marks in the NFL. So we've got a defense that's not going to let you run against a team that typically wants to, stay balanced and run. But we've got a quarterback running hot against the defense that's really bad. I think all signs point to a really big week for Justin Herbert. I will say, we had Russell Wilson in this same spot last week, and he was a total dud. Not to bring everybody down, but this is not a foolproof thing. But I think we all agree Justin Herbert, better quarterback than Russell Wilson. I'm even more confident in this one than I was last week. So he moves into that mid-range QB1 territory. You just showed it. I think, what do we have him? QB4 as a staff? Yeah. So I think I have him QB5.
You mentioned Herbert running hot. Certainly is as a passer, but also Dwain on the ground as well. Over these last 4 weeks, only Jalen Hurts and Drake May actually have more rushing yards than Herbert among all QBs. So really does seem to all be setting up well for Herbert Freedman, as long as that Ravens defense isn't starting to really round the form.
I have him as my QB3 this week, and it feels so aggressive and dirty, but then you think, all right, Josh Allen is out on bye. The same with Joe Burrow. So it's not a normal week. Normal situation, Justin Herbert wouldn't be my QB3. But that said, he's going against the Ravens. That pretty much cleanses everything. Now, it didn't last week for Russell Wilson, as Dwain mentioned, but Herbert is not Russell Wilson. And since the week 5 bye, 9.5 adjusted yards per attempt. If you had to pick just one stat, just one QB stat to predict who wins MVP this year, other than, of course, hashtag QB wins, it might be adjusted yards per attempt. And I'm not saying Justin Herbert is going to win MVP, but I'm saying since the week 5 bye, he has been playing at a near MVP type of level. And then Ian, as you mentioned, the running ability on the ground since the bye, 158 yards on the ground. That's not like Lamar Jackson, but it's enough to give him a little bit of an elevated floor. And the Ravens, number 4 in most fantasy points allowed, 2 quarterbacks, just absolute great spot for him this week.
What week did you buy his MVP ticket, Freedman?
I do not have it, sadly.
Oh, you bought Tua last year, but you can't get a Herbert this year? Come on.
I do have the Chargers 45-1 to win the Super Bowl from the preseason, but that's not going to happen.
Okay, we'll see. I like that more than your kicker MVP thing, but we're not going to go back down that road. This is a family-friendly show after all. Guys, that was our riser of the week, but we have to also talk about a faller who, again, really has been one of the more disappointing, if not the most disappointing quarterback in Fantasyland this season. Dwain, talk about CJ Stroud going up against the Titans defense that generally has been good against the pass this year, albeit hasn't exactly been putting their best foot forward in recent weeks.
Yeah, they're a little banged up right now, but they've still been a tough matchup. But when you look at Stroud, I mean, we've got Nico Collins back. That's obviously a boost for him. But, man, I've got him at QB 15 this week, Ian, with 6 teams on bye. I think that just tells you a lot about where we're at on CJ Stroud. And honestly, I couldn't find a reason to try to push him any higher. He's kind of in a tier of guys right there in that high-end QB2 territory. Like, okay, he could have a good week, but he could just as easily have a terrible week. So he's not someone I'm trying to force into fantasy lineups this weekend. There's a lot of guys right there with him that I actually like a little better than him. But I think one of the big things here, Ian, if you look at CJ Stroud over these last several games, averaging 12.9 points over the last 4 to be exact, that's just not good, man. And he's not been good for the entire season. You look at the Titans, they're only giving up 163 passing yards per game. Like you said, been giving up a little bit more than that here recently, but it's not like they've been, hemorrhaging 300-yard passers here. So the other thing is just watching Stroud. And I've gone back, I've got to watch him a lot when he's playing his games, but I've gone back and I've watched more of it. And man, there's just something going on with him right now with his accuracy. He could snap out of it this weekend, but you guys saw it last weekend, with Nico Collins, the throw over the middle, just doesn't step into it, ends up leaving it short. Nico still nearly scoops it. They don't quite get the play off. Mike McCarthy makes one good call all game and is throwing a challenge on that play, the game was already over and I lost my parlay. So thanks, Mike McCarthy. You still suck. And then looking at Stroud, on these just several throws just like that, Ian. I mean, just where it's just not quite there and the timing's not right with the receivers. He had another one where Tank Dell was wide open and missed him. So it's been going on for several weeks now. He's got a 58% completion rate over these last 4 games. Again, that's probably not going to be sticky. Stroud will eventually snap out of that. But, man, you got a defense that's going to challenge the receivers. So I'm just not in a hurry to get this guy into my lineups. I'm not saying he's a must bench, but he won't be in most of my starting lineups. If I have any other option, I'm probably leaning that way.
Not all on Stroud. He's been under pressure as much as, pretty much any quarterback along with Caleb Williams over the past 6 weeks. Pass catchers banged up. But to Dwayne's point, it is also a little bit on Stroud. And when you are such a pure pocket passer, if you're not getting elite returns from that passing production, Freedman makes it really tough to trust a guy in Fantasyland.
Yeah, and thinking about this from the sports betting perspective this week, the under is, I think, the best side for this game. Texans-Titans, the total is 42. I have it projected at 40.1. I'm not really expecting points in this game. You have a matchup with 2 top 6 defenses, 2 slow offenses, a bad Titans offense, which means what incentive do the Texans have on offense to move the ball at pace as aggressively as possible? This feels like a game where it's Joe Mixon getting probably more touches than he should, and that means CJ Stroud and everyone in the passing game not getting as many opportunities as they probably should. So another week where CJ Stroud, even though he could have an efficient game, probably won't have enough volume to make you feel like you absolutely have to have him in your starting lineup.
Last time CJ Stroud finished better than QB 14 in fantasy was all the way back in week 4. I mean, at this point, Anthony Richardson has more top 8 finishes than CJ Stroud on the season. What a time to be alive. Hopefully the return of Nico sparks this offense, but yeah, not someone who needs to be jammed in the starting lineups, at least for this week. Takes us, though, to someone who probably should. It is Freedman's favorite, everybody. And Freedman, what is this, the second or third time in 3 or 4 weeks? Bo Nix once again in there, and why not, man? He's been playing great ball.
Yeah, I mean, nothing highly original with this at this point. I just want to say a blanket statement first. How amazed I've been at how good Bo Nix has looked this early in his career, especially based on what we saw in the first month of the season out of him. It looked like he would be one of those rookie quarterbacks that the team was kind of planning around, like trying to minimize within the offense. He had just a 60% completion rate, 3.6 adjusted yards per attempt. Like that is like rookie Goff level bad, like Zach Wilson rookie level bad. Just 12.3 fantasy points per game. A lot of that boosted because of the running ability. But since week 5, there's been a pretty marked turnaround. Really nice 69% completion rate, 8.2 adjusted yards per attempt, 21.6 fantasy points per game. He's been a top 12 fantasy producer 5 times over the past 7 weeks. And then, of course, with a number of good quarterbacks on bye, that means Bo Nix moves up the fantasy ranks. And I will say the matchup is a part of why we do like him this week. You know, a pessimist could look at Nix's recent run of production and say he's had some really nice matchups in that run. Of course, a realist could be like, well, one of those teams was the Raiders, and that's who he's playing against this week. Raiders number 28 in defensive dropback success rate. Against them in week 5, Nix had his first top 10 performance of the season, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns passing, and then another touchdown on the ground. From the sports betting perspective, I bet the Broncos in the look-ahead market this past weekend at -3. Log them in our free Fantasy Life bet tracker, by the way. Be sure to check that out. I have them projected at -6 points, and this number continues to move towards the Broncos. Like the market just continues to think, wait a minute, the Broncos are better than we think and the Raiders are worse than we think. I think with Nix at quarterback, the Broncos overall are going to put up a lot of points this week.
Yes, last week maybe wasn't the most impressive one constant bomb downfield type window display ever. His average target depth ended up being under 5 yards. But shout out to Underdog Fantasy's Josh Norris, who pointed out that Bo Nix this year, guys, leads the NFL in passing attempts 20-plus yards downfield. So we got Sean Payton pushing a lot of easy buttons in this offense recently. Shout out to Steve Patton, has some play caller rankings. Actually has Payton right now as the 8th best play caller in the NFL and added EPA. A lot of good things happening in Denver with a roster that I think we pretty much all consider the worst in the NFL. And again, starting all with that rookie quarterback. So great job by Bo Nix. That said, Dwayne, not everyone's going to be lucky enough to be able to get someone who is in our consensus top 6 in the QB rankings into those fantasy lineups. So we got 6 teams on bye, Dwayne. We need your help. Who's the Sicko Start?
I will say I was going to go with Bo Nix, but because he is now in 44% of starting lineups on Yahoo, he was too high. You have to be 30% or below to make a Sicko Start. So still, though, that's too low, guys. If we have him in our top 6 in our ranks and he's only in 44% of lineups, I would say that's too low. Also only rostered in 66% of leagues. So he's still available. Ian, you and I playing some skank leagues together. I picked up Bo Nix, or tried to, in 2 of them last night. He was somehow available on the waiver wire. I don't know how we let it get this far with Bo Nix available, but we had to go after him due to some bye week things. I can't remember if it was Joe Burrow or who it was, but yeah, I had to go with Drake May this week because only in 8% of starting lineups. He's available in 85% of Yahoo leagues right now. So I'm not going to go super deep on this one. I'm just going to keep it simple because it works. So in his 5 complete games, Ian, Drake May, averaging 238 passing yards per game with 1.8 touchdowns through the air. Most people are like, that's not that great. Well, it's above the league average, and he's tacking on 41 yards per game on the ground. And this is all through scrambling. The light bulb still hasn't come on that they can actually use this guy a little bit in the design run game, which we actually saw him do in the preseason. That was one of the things that got people the most excited. I don't know if you guys remember the read option play at the 1 yard line, and he tucks it and goes in for the touchdown, kind of like what we'd seen Jaden Daniels doing in the preseason, and that lasted into the regular season. But look, he's averaged 19.6 fantasy points per game in the 5 healthy games. So I threw out the 1 game where he left due to the concussion early. Here are his quarterback finishes: QB8, QB7, QB12, QB15, QB12. That's a guy that has the floor and a mid-range QB1 upside, and you can still get him in most of your leagues. So it doesn't even really matter what the matchup is. This is a guy that can do it on the ground. He's good enough through the air. He doesn't have the weapons to necessarily get things cooking, but maybe he can. Bo Nix doesn't have a ton of weapons either. He does have Sean Payton dialing up some of the easy buttons, like you said, Hartitz. But yeah, looking at Drake May, man, just keeping it simple. Like, those numbers are too good. If you are hurting, this guy is available, and you can start him this weekend.
Only quarterbacks averaging more rushing yards per game than Drake May, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, and Anthony Richardson. That's right. We were talking about May literally being tied with Kyler Murray in terms of rushing yards per game. So great stuff from the number 3 overall pick. And yes, Patriots fans, I know this year hasn't been great, but really do think the future is bright, thanks in large part to May under center. Let's talk some running backs now. Guys, getting to our overview first off. And again, invite you all to go to FantasyLife.com where you can see our full quote-unquote expert consensus ranking. So with our top 12 now on the screen, Saquon, CMC, Achane, and Joe Mixon in the top 4. But don't sleep on Kenneth Walker, guys, who has been having an outrageous season. Highest missed tackles force rate on rush attempts by any running back since the year 2020 with a minimum of 100 attempts. So always a fun watch. After him, though, Jahmyr Gibbs, James Conner in a great matchup against the Seahawks. Went for over 200 yards against them earlier this year in Week 18. Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Kyren Williams, David Montgomery, and returning from bye Tyron Tracy, rounding out the top 12. Obviously not going to be lucky enough to start all those guys though. So as we get into the RB2 ranks, want to highlight again, Chuba Hubbard down a little bit, RB16. Not sure how much of that meat, we're going to see Jonathan Brooks eating off the bone of that backfield. Then Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, and Brian Robinson rounding out the top 20, followed by guys like Rico Dowdle, J.K. Dobbins in a tough matchup against the Ravens, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson back, and also Javonte Williams, seemingly the RB1 in Denver for now, but as we've seen with Sean Payton, tough to overly trust that. So good stuff there, guys, but want to focus on someone who, again, was actually in that more so top 12 conversation, or at least should be for this week. David Montgomery going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Dwain, your riser of the week.
Yeah, for sure. And look, Jahmyr Gibbs gets most of the hype in this backfield, and for good reason when you watch him. You guys all see it. You're like, man, if they gave this dude the ball all the time, like Jahmyr Gibbs would be the running back 1, probably in fantasy, which is saying something this year because we've got a lot of really good performers at the running back position. But David Montgomery in year 2 of this duo backfield, Sonic and Knuckles, like he's still been really good. And he's averaging 16.4 fantasy points per game. Now, the utilization score will tell you that he is a game script dependent back. You start seeing these guys in that 6 to 7 range. A lot of times that's what it is. Even Derrick Henry lives in that range. Why? Because they don't get the route participation we want. They don't normally get the targets we want. Ian, you talked about over the last 4 games, they actually have used David Montgomery more in the past game. Some of that came last week with Sam Laporta out. But the big thing here is the role he's playing in. It's perfect for the offense that he's playing in because this is a team that doesn't trail. So they don't get into these game script problems that we see with some of these other running backs. Freedman's going to talk to you about another one here. Very similar archetype to what we're talking about here with David Montgomery for his favorite. But this is a team that leads all the time. They've only trailed by 4+ points, which is the mark where I've historically seen that it actually does change the way a team behaves as far as calling pass or run based on data over the last 10 years in the NFL. And so they've only trailed by 4+ points on 18% of their plays. That's the 4th least in the NFL. And here's the other thing. No team is more effective than the Lions on a per drive basis of punching in touchdowns. And a big part of that is because how good Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are on the ground game along with that offensive line. They score a touchdown on 36% of their drives. That's number 1 in the NFL. And they love running the ball inside the 5. 69% of their plays inside the 5 are rushing attempts. So Dan Campbell is out here biting kneecaps. They love getting this thing done on the ground. And David Montgomery is the guy that they often turn to. You see Jahmyr Gibbs too, but man, Dave Montgomery, if you look at the utilization here, he actually has leading the team for the year on carries inside the 5-yard line. He's gotten 54% of those based on this handy dandy comparison tool. You guys can check it out over in the utilization suite at FantasyLife.com. And then we've got the last part here, Ian, 8-point favorites, right? So that just plays into being able to run the ball, playing against the Colts defense, giving up 143 yards per game on the ground. That's the 4th most on the slate this weekend. So it's just a good matchup. They're going to score a lot of points. They're just going to keep doing what they've been doing. I think this is a very similar spot to what we saw last week from Montgomery, and he came out and gave us 95 total yards and 2 touchdowns. I think you can see a very similar performance this weekend. So I've got him as my running back 10. Obviously, having 6 teams on bye helps Montgomery a little bit this week, but he is a running back 1.
Dwayne mentioned that goal line roll, 12 carries from inside the 5-yard line this season. Only Derrick Henry has more. I mean, Freedman, he scored in all but 2 games this season. So even if you're not blessed enough to have him on the fantasy squad, you getting in those anytime touchdown streaks?
Yeah, absolutely. Some nice stats there mentioned by Dwain. Montgomery's a touchdown machine just this year, 11, including a passing score in 10 games. Last year, 15 and 17, including the playoffs. Not hard to imagine me having a bet on him to score an anytime touchdown this week.
Love to hear that. And if you're going to do those anytime touchdowns, remember, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. However, might not be wanting to bet touchdowns for our next running back, the faller of the week. And this was before we even found out about a groin injury that has him as a DNP starting things off. DeAndre Swift, Dwain, already in a tough matchup against that league best Vikings defense and EPA allowed per rush. Again, now dealing with a groin injury where Matt Eberflus simply said they're hopeful he'll be good to go Sunday. Not exactly how you want to start the week. Again, given the tough matchup and especially given the boost in utilization from Roschon Johnson last week.
Yeah, it's really a triple whammy on DeAndre Swift this week. Like, even if he had his full role, you'd be playing the Vikings, who only give up 67.5 yards per game. That would be a downgrade for DeAndre Swift. Well, then you get the fact that last week we saw the largest role of the season for Roschon Johnson, to your point, with Thomas Brown coming in. We've got an offensive coordinator change. We have to respect the 1 week utilization that we saw last week, maybe a little more than what we would typically on any just other random 1 week sample, because this could be a shift that lasts going forward. The big part, Ian, that hurt the most is Roschon Johnson took over the 2-minute offense and he took over the carries inside the 5-yard line. DeAndre Swift still got one, but it was more about Roschon. Those are two of the most valuable plays per snap for running backs in fantasy. You don't see those plays that often, but they're very high leverage plays, and that's where your fantasy points come from. So those are real challenges for Swift. And then on top of that, you talk about the groin injury. All right. Groin. I messed it up. I said growing. I tried, Ian. You even set me up. You said it right to start. The Texan in me just coming out. Freedman can probably say it right, even though he is in my state today. But yeah, it's the triple whammy today for DeAndre Swift. I think he's a borderline running back 2. And now, like with this news, probably honestly just push him down to like mid-range running back 3, which is saying a lot on a week where we've got 6 teams on bye.
Freedman, I mean, again, not liking DeAndre Swift. I think we can all agree on that. But if we do see Swift sidelined, one of these situations where suddenly we will be feeling a lot better about Roschon Johnson. Let's say Swift is out. Freedman, would you rather start Chuba Hubbard or Roschon Johnson?
Chuba, but it's close.
What? Dwain, come on. We're going Roschon there, right?
Oh, I'm going Chuba. I know that the Chiefs are really tough, but I mean, Chuba's had the for sure guaranteed role. I mean, it's close. I would say it's a coin flip. I wrote about this in the Risers and Fallers article. That look, even if Roschon were to be the starter, it's hard to get super excited because of the matchup. He would be that low end running back 2, which is where I have Hubbard. So I mean, it's a tier.
RB18.
He's so disappointed. He just goes, yeah.
No. RB18, you heard Dwain say it is, in fact, a groin flip. So, just one of these situations where, yeah, you'd be pretty happy to have either guy in the starting lineup. I had a list of guys I was going to move up, expecting you guys to say Roschon. So, not going to exactly do that exercise because Freedman, I'm guessing that you would certainly be starting then Freedman's favorite of the week, Brian Robinson, ahead of the potential Bears RB1.
Yeah, Brian Robinson is in the total smash spot this week. Let's just look at this situation. In the betting streets, there's this mythological thing called the quote-unquote Widowmaker spot. We see it only like 2 to 3 times a year, but this week we get an instance of it, and it's the Cowboys on a 1-day deficit coming off of Monday Night Football, playing the Commanders on a 3-day surplus off of Thursday Night Football. So even though this game is operating within like the normal week-to-week flow of the season, the coaches and players for the Cowboys have a rare 4-day rest and prep disadvantage. That is absolutely killer. And then historically, the Widowmakers at home have dominated. So the Commanders are in this baseline of 10-4 against the spread is what we've seen home Widowmakers perform. And so we should just kind of expect overall everything for the Commanders to be leveled up this week. And then you just look at the matchup. The Cowboys, number 29 in defensive pass DVOA, without their 4 different edge rushers. I think that means the Commanders, through the passing game, are going to be able to move the ball down the field, especially because the Cowboys could also be without starting cornerbacks Deron Bland and Jordan Lewis. So I think the Commanders can move the ball at will. And then especially considering that the Cowboys are number 32 in defensive rush EPA. So this is all kind of painting painting the picture of outstanding situation for the Commanders offense, which means I think we could see Brian Robinson have multiple chances at the goal line to get touchdowns. And he's exited some games early, missed some games, but when he's been healthy, he's had an incredibly high baseline, either 75 yards or touchdown in every contest, 12 plus opportunities in every game but one. This just feels like, I wouldn't say like Joe Mixon last week where he has over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns, but could we see 80, 90 yards and 2 touchdowns for Brian Robinson? Yeah, like that feels very much within the range of outcomes here. So just absolutely love Brian Robinson this spot. And I hate to say it, betting on the Commanders against my Cowboys.
The Widowmaker smash spot of the week. That is provocative, my friend. Certainly has our rankers getting going. Top 14 running back from each of our, quote unquote experts over there on FantasyLife.com. Not as excited though, Dwain, about Rico Dowdle. That said, as we showed in our rankings, still cracking the top 24 because even on an offense as bad as the Cowboys, when you get as much volume as Rico, tough to push him too far down the ranks.
Yeah, and again, having 6 teams out help. But he is on 73% of rosters, but only in 37% of lineups. I really had to scratch by. Typically, I use the 30% mark, but some of the running backs below 30%, I just couldn't recommend to you guys. I honestly couldn't find one that could even make it into the Sicko Street. So I did go with Dowdle here. Freedman just talked about a lot of things that are why you wouldn't want to play Dowdle. Because they are 11-point dogs right now in this game, coming off of a short week. But it is a guy that's averaging, the touches that we want, so he's getting 15.4 opportunities per game over the last 3 weeks. So that's just adding his rushing attempts plus his targets together. So anytime you get that, you have like a puncher's chance, right? If he comes through with 1 touchdown in the game, and let's say he gets 11 or 12 carries, a couple of catches, like he could still scratch out 15 fantasy points for you. I mean, I think we've got him projected right now for 11 or 12 right now over on the site. So again, not someone I'm super confident in, but you got Chase Brown on bye. You've been just vibing. You've got him in there. You don't really have a replacement. Rico Dowdle is a name. I don't think you're going to get a complete dud from him. I say that. The last 2 games with Cooper Rush, he's giving you 9 and 5. So there is a chance he gives you a dud as well, which is why we've got him lower. But I think he has a decent shot, Ian, to give you 12, 13 fantasy points. That's the range I would be aiming for with him.
Cowboys tied for the 4th lowest implied team total this week. So yeah, not exactly going out of our way to get exposure to the offense, but CeeDee Lamb and Rico Dowdle, really the true 2 volume hogs in there. We are feeling at least somewhat okay about their chances. And speaking of CeeDee Lamb, let's get into our wide receiver rankings, fellas. Going to kick things off again, showing our lovely YouTubers out there our top 12 consensus ranks. And yes, you guessed it. Leading things off at number 1 is our one true sun god, coming off that amazing 160 plus yard 2 touchdown performance last week, followed by Jay Jetta's AJB, Puka Nacua, and yes, Nico Collins, fresh off his return from the hamstring injury. Cooper Kupp, and then a pair of NFC East receivers dealing with sadly backup quarterbacks, Malik Neighbors and CeeDee Lamb. Tyreek Hill, George Pickens still in the top 10. Just keep an eye on that radar in Cleveland ahead tonight. And then Cortland Sutton balling out recently, as well as scary Terry McLaurin rounding out our top 12. Looking at the more wide receiver 2 side of things, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith, Najigba ahead of DK Metcalf in this economy, no less. Things you love to see, but not as much as we love to see Mike Evans back in the picture, sitting pretty as the wide receiver 16, expecting to make his return from that hamstring injury. So Jacoby Myers, Juwan Jennings, Lab McConkey rounding out the top 19. More guys like Debo, Marvin Harrison Jr., and yes, Calvin Ridley in the top 24. So did not crack our top 24. That said, Dwain, a major riser of the week and someone who should be winning out the majority of close calls, maybe in that flex spot more than anything. Talk about Lions wide receiver 2, Jameson Williams, going up against the Colts, even with Sam Laporta potentially being back.
Well, I think you and I tried. I've got JMO at wide receiver 19 this week. Now, again, part of this is a function of having 6 teams on bye. He's normally a boom bust wide receiver 3. His profile hasn't really changed. You just have other teams on bye, and you've got really a good matchup here. Like, I would definitely start him over Jacoby Myers, who we're showing ahead in our ranks, playing against the Denver Broncos. Look, I like Jacoby Myers more than probably a lot of people, but I don't really want to mess with that against the Broncos. I would rather take a shot on an upside game from JMO. So when you look at him, Ian, he is leading the team in air yards per per game at 75.6. He's averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game. But when he booms, he booms. Yeah, week one, we got that 30% target share. Everybody thought, oh my God, is this the awakening of JMO? And it really hasn't been. He's really been in that same targets per route run rate of like 18%, 17%. So hasn't turned into that high-end target earner, but because of the air yards and the offense that he resides in, this offensive environment is amazing for him. Now, last week he didn't have Sam Laporta. That could help funnel a little bit more targets his way, but it does sound like Dan Campbell's hopeful for Sam Laporta this weekend, so we might not get that same bump. But again, still a good matchup against the Colts. Let's be honest, the Colts are a good matchup all the way around. I just talked about David Montgomery, in the segment before. We could have easily talked about Jared Goff in our quarterback section. So you're playing against the Colts. You like it, however you can take it. They are giving up. We've got the highest team total at 29.5 for the Lions this week, and the Colts are giving up the third most passing yards per game on the slate at 247 and 1.5 touchdowns per game. So this is one of those spots, Ian, where you've said it before, you're not going to get 10 targets from JMO, but the 6 that you get, the 4 that he catches, he could take 2 of them to the house. So he can easily still give you that 90 yards and 2 touchdown performance. At worst, right, you're typically coming away with like 60 yards because you're getting 1 big play, 3 catches. So, I mean, like the floor is 9-10 points typically with JMO, but you also have the upside to score 20-plus fantasy points. So he's my wide receiver 19 this weekend.
And that is the tricky part, Freedman. I mean, he is a boom or bust, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type. But man, if we're going to be betting on these sorts of archetypes, might as well be the ones that exist inside the offense implied to score the most points of week 12.
Yeah, I need to bump him up a little bit in my rankings. 8 games this year, he's scored a touchdown in 4 of them. And in those games, he has yardage totals of 134, 126, 87, and 80. Like when he scores, he doesn't just score. It's like Deshaun Jackson back in the day. When he scores, he goes off. A whole lot of yards accompany those touchdowns. And this week, as you mentioned, Ian, the Lions have a week high implied point total of 29.25, and they're going against a secondary that is without number 1 cornerback Juju Brents. The perimeter cornerbacks out there, Jalen Jones 9.3 yards per target, Samuel Womack 9.6 yards per target this year. Those guys are exploitable. So yeah, Jameson Williams, he might have only 4 targets, but with those 4 targets, he legitimately does have a chance of having 100 yards and a touchdown.
Really has been a nice year, save for the 2-game suspension for JMO, someone who, again, was available usually in the mid to later rounds of fantasy drafts. Nice value more weeks than not there. Can't say the same, though, Dwain, for Tank Dell, who, my God, man, he hasn't been quite as bad as Jalen Waddle, but hasn't been all that good either. Guys like Alec Pierce and Rashad Bateman have more PPR points per game this year, and especially with the return of Nico Collins now, man, tough to call him anything but a faller in the ranks.
Yeah, it is tough. We also have, the issues that we talked about earlier with CJ Stroud, but Nico Collins back in the offense. And the other fact of the matter is, like, we had a chance for Tank Dell to really step up and do big things, Ian, when he didn't have Nico Collins and or Stephon Diggs for multiple games. And if you look at from week 6 to week 10, where you had one or both of those wide receivers gone, he only averaged 11.8 fantasy points. He did not come through for us. Now, we're not saying that Tank Dell's done. He's still a young player. Maybe there's just something off with him this year. But this weekend, you got the matchup against the Titans. We already talked about it for CJ Stroud. So I just couldn't find a reason to really push him that high. He is my wide receiver 30 overall. But again, it's because 6 teams are on bye. On most weekends, he would be a wide receiver 4 for me. So if you've got a close decision with Tank Dell, I'm probably leaning to the other wide receiver given the matchup.
Takes us to Freedman's favorite of the week, but I'm disappointed. All right, I've been yelling at Dwain about this, and Freedman, he's allegedly your favorite, but you still have Jawan Jennings ranked behind Deebo Samuel. Why?
Yeah, I don't know what to say in recompense.
He's dumbfounded.
I will just say I'm going to bump him up. I see you have him. Is it what, wide receiver 12? I'm going 13. To bump him up to that range. So you're wide receiver 13. I'm going to move him up to wide receiver 12. Just got to put the rankings where my mouth is. Jawan Jennings in his 3 games without either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk, 12 targets, 11 and 11 in his 3 games like that. Again, 89% route rate, 95% route rate. Last week, a 97% route rate. So the production that he's had 175 yards, 93 yards, 91 yards, 4 touchdowns in those 3 games. That production is actually sustainable as long as he continues to be targeted and utilized in the fashion that we have seen. And I think there's a case we continue to see that. And then, of course, the matchup against the Packers, number 30 in defensive dropback success rate, and they could be without number 1 cornerback Jair Alexander, who exited last week after just 10 snaps with a knee injury. He's been in and out of the lineup throughout the entire year. I'm skeptical we actually see him play this week. And so you have Jennings going against a wounded Packers secondary. It feels like it could be another great situation. But of course, maybe this week, you never know what happens with the 49ers offense. Maybe it's a McCaffrey game. Maybe it's a Kittle game. Maybe it's a Samuel game. That's why initially I was a little more pessimistic in the rankings with Jauan Jennings, but I do want to bump him up, given that it feels like Jair Alexander could be out.
I hear you. Wide receiver 13 sounds high, but after all, it is where he ranks this season in PPR points per game. 15.6, guys. Garrett Wilson only at 15.61. So that really is what we're working with here. That said, Dwayne, not everyone is lucky enough to get to start Jauan Jennings. Might have to get a little bit sick out here. And if you're going to do that, you're looking at Quentin Johnson here ahead of, guess what? That good matchup against the Ravens.
Yeah, still available in 54% of leagues over at Yahoo. That surprised me, only in 24% of lineups. So Quentin Johnson, not only might you be able to plug him into your lineup, you might be able to pick him up off of your waiver wire if you are hurting. So looking at him since he returned from that injury 3 weeks ago, Ian, 21% target share. That's tied for second on the team with Mr. Will Disley. But leading the team in air yards, 33%, and end zone targets, 40% of the targets in the end zone, makes sense, have gone to the big body Quentin Johnson. And you've also mentioned it, Ian. He's had some he's had some near sheesh plays, like just misses, man, on some really big plays down the field. Have had some good plays by some defenders as well, getting a hand in at the last second to break one up last week. DJ Turner now on IR for the Bengals. That was a potential big play. So we've seen a few of those for Johnson. Like the box score could have been even bigger, but he's averaging, with all that, 15.1 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks in this red-hot Chargers offense. We already talked about it earlier. Ravens are going to take away the run game, going to force Herbert to throw the ball. That's going to lead to more opportunities for Quentin Johnston, and the Ravens have been terrible against the pass. So, yeah, he is a borderline wide receiver 2 for me this weekend, and he could give you a high-end wide receiver 1 finish. I'm not joking. Like, would we be surprised if we're talking about this on Monday? You guys are on, you and Charch and Chris, and you're like, wow, Quentin Johnson, 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, that could happen this weekend for this guy.
Maybe Dwayne getting ahead of himself on his Friday Bowl prediction. I guess we will have to see about that tomorrow. But I'm with you, Dwayne. As much as I like to point out that, again, some of his touchdowns coming with the blown coverage variety, those points still count the same in fantasy land. And he has still looked good out there. I mean, that comeback route he had last week for a good 20-25, really sharp stuff out of him. Certainly has that speed to make cornerbacks respect him at all areas of the field. So, guys, that was our wide receiver discourse. But now, time to turn our attention to the next onesie position. It is our tight end rankings overview with our top 12 on the screen now. You can see, yes, the rookie himself sitting pretty as the tight end 1, Brock Bowers, followed by Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and returning from bye, Trey McBride and Cade Otton. David Njoku rounding out the top 6, but sitting there as our tight end 7, Jonnu Smith coming off his huge week 11 performance, TJ Hawkinson, Hunter Henry, Will Disley, Dallas Goedert, and yes, Zach Ertz rounding out the top 12 there. But Freedman, want to focus on the man that's again leading up the right side of our graphic here. Jonnu Smith, one of only 10 tight ends with double-digit PPR points per game this season, and unironically, the number 2 target in this Dolphins offense.
Yeah, I mean, I love me some good narratives, and we've got the hashtag revenge game for Jonnu Smith this week going against the Patriots. It's Shakespearean, really, how underutilized he was in New England, and then now he returns, and he's in the midst of a real breakout campaign after like the potential that was shown in his first few seasons with the Titans. Now it feels like that is actually coming to fruition. Since the week 6 bye, he has 308 yards, 2 touchdowns receiving on 31 targets with a really strong 23% target rate, 21% target share. He's number 2 on the team in targets and receiving yards behind only Tyreek Hill, and then going against the Patriots. In his first game against the Patriots earlier this year, 5 receptions, 62 yards on 8 targets. Now now he's an even bigger part of the offense, and the Patriots are without free safety Jabril Peppers and might also be without free safety Marte Mapu, who missed last week with the neck injury. So good overall situation. And then, of course, he has the usage to back it up.
Mentioned that featured role for him in the passing game. It really has stood out as well inside the 10-yard line. Had back-to-back targets from the 1 last week, and with 4 on the season, only trails Tyreek Hill by 2. So good stuff there on Jonnu. Again, our consensus tight end 7. Dwain, though, just underneath him is going to be your sicko start of the week. Hunter Hurst Henry has more PPR points per game this year than Mark Andrews and Sam Laporta. You like him here going up on the other side of this matchup against the Dolphins.
Yeah, available in 55% of Yahoo leagues, only in 24% of starting lineups. I do think that number should be higher. Hunter Henry has a 7.9 utilization score in games where we've had a complete game from Drake May. So that's borderline mid-range tight end 1 territory. He hasn't always come through with that, but man, the guy's still averaging 11.2 fantasy points per game in the games with Drake May as the starter. Ian, that is really strong. If you look at him over that stretch, he is the leader with that 7.9 utilization score. He's got a 20% target share. Second on the team would be Kayshon Boutte at Demario Douglas at 19%, and third would be Kayshon Boutte. So they don't really have another guy that can dominate. Demario Douglas is the other best target earner on the team, but they don't run 11 personnel enough to keep him out there as a constant threat. Whereas with Hunter Henry, he's not leaving the field that much. He's got an 83% route participation in these games with Drake May. So yes, I am looking at him as being an upgrade this weekend. He's a low-end tight end 1 with mid-range tight end 1 upside, and a guy that you can. I was going to use Zach Ertz, but I can't. I just can't use Zach Ertz anymore. He has been a sicko start like 3 or 4 times this year, and so he and Hunter Henry were neck and neck, and it made me really force me to even look at Hunter Henry more, and I'm glad I did because I think I might start him over Zach Ertz this weekend, but I can't. The only reason being the team total. There's just so much potential. Like Freedman said, the Widowmaker. We could have 50 points from the Commanders, which means, Ertz is going to have a better chance of scoring a touchdown than Hunter Henry.
I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know what the Widowmaker spot was before this show. Now it's all I can think about. So looking forward to watching the film, getting better. Appreciate you guys, again, bringing that into my daily lexicon now. So those were our rankings overviews, everyone. But now I want to help out some of our trusty Discord members, which we invite you to join. It is free after all. The Fantasy Life Discord, where a lot of us get in there and do office hours throughout the week and, just talk ball. It's a good time. Get into some of their start-sit questions, starting off with, guys, Aaron Jones or Brian Robinson. Freedman, I can only assume since he's your favorite, you are going with Robinson. Is it true?
Yes. Hashtag Widowmaker trumps everything. So going with Brian Robinson.
The Widowmaker, Dwain, you with him?
Yep, Brian Robinson, have him above. And just with Aaron Jones, man, we don't know if it's to do with the injury or they're changing things, but Cam Akers getting more of the work over the last 2 games. So that kind of puts him in a similar spot, right? Both part-time backs. I'll take the Widowmaker.
We are taking the Widowmaker 3 for 3. For what it's worth, Aaron Jones did practice in full on Wednesday with that rib injury, but again, too good of a spot to pass up on Robinson. Dwain, what about Tyrone Tracy versus returning from bye Rachaad White? I guess they both are.
Tyrone Tracy, slam dunk in this one. I like Rachaad White. Like, he's running hot, but he's also overperforming for the role that he has right now in the offense. We should get Mike Evans back. That could steal away a few of the targets. Again, hat tip to Rachaad White. Really, honestly, I think playing his best football ever of his career over this stretch where he's been threatened to lose it, to potentially losing his job. Bucky Irving is taking more of the rushing attempts for the team, but man, been very good in the passing attack. And when they're giving him carries, looking light on those feet, scoring touchdowns, doing his thing. But man, Tyrone Tracy, the workload is still too large. I am a little worried with Tyrone Tracy, and you brought this up a couple of weeks ago. He had the fumble, he had a tip pass for a pick at the end of a game. Do we see more Devin Singletary? I don't know after the bye, but I am still leaning to Tyrone Tracy.
Does seem like Freedman. Tracy, as long as that workload persists, he is in a 1 RB situation in New York. Rachaad White obviously still going to be splitting stuff up with Bucky Irving. So you with us 3 for 3, Tyrone Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy's on the RB1 borderline, and I don't think Rachaad White is that particularly close.
Next up, guys, Ramondre Stevenson or Chuba Hubbard, right next to each other in the ranks. Freedman, what say you?
Stevenson, but as you mentioned, they're right next to each other in the ranks. I have Stevenson 17, Chubb 18, Chuba Hubbard 18. So yeah. Maybe
enough of a concern with Jonathan Brooks coming back. Dwain, you going with Mondre?
Yep, going Mondre. I've got him 15. I have got Chuba Hubbard 19 in the ranks. Mondre, man, over these last 4 games, look, Drake May has fixed a lot of things for the Patriots offense, and one of them is Mondre. Mondre's really back into his full-time role. Games are staying closer, so yeah, I am leaning to him against the Dolphins rather than Chuba Hubbard in the toughest matchup in Fantasyland for running backs playing against the Chiefs.
3 for 3 on Stevenson. What about Calvin Ridley versus Jameson Williams, though, Dwain?
I'm leaning JMO. This one really is close. Calvin Ridley is getting more targets. Calvin Ridley, you know, I think, you know, the offense has the potential to center around him in any given week. The problem is that offense could be crap. Like it could be 150 passing yards. It's been better. You know, we had 175 yards 2 weeks ago. Last week, Will Levis was out there just balling out. So we don't really know which one we're going to get, but I'm pretty comfortable with the Lions that they're going to be a good offense every week. So it's like, I'm going to take those 5 to 6 targets from JMO in that offense over the 8 to 9 I'm going to get from Calvin Ridley. But this one could go wrong. I will say, if whoever asked this question has a gut feel on one of them, go with the one that you like.
I have JMO, but I'm with Dwain in terms of Freedman. This seems like the closest one.
It is close. And I would say if you're looking for floor, I would go with Ridley. If you're looking for ceiling, I would go with Williams. That's probably the way I would look at this.
Last one, guys. TJ Hawkinson or Will Dissly. Dwain, what say you?
Oh my God. We just talked about last week how TJ Hawkinson back in the mid-range tight end 1 conversation. He's going to be knocking on the door of the top 3. And I'm about to say Will Dissly against the Ravens. What's wrong with me? I'm a freaking sick person. I do have technically TJ Hawkinson 1 spot ahead of Will Dissly in the ranks. Another really tight one. But I'm going to stick with Hawkinson here. But man, it's closer than I want it to be.
Yeah, Freedman, I'm going Hawkinson too, but I hate how much I had to hesitate when I thought about it.
I'm going with Dissly, but it makes me feel dirty. I don't like it. Yeah.
The dirty Dissly, you heard it from Freedman himself. So good stuff. And again,
Freedman
guys,
has it that way. Freedman has Dissly 8 and Hawkinson 10.
If you guys take one thing away from this podcast, it's that's Will Dissly tied out 1 season. Let's go. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow breaking down some injuries. But otherwise, enjoy Thursday Night Football and get those minds right. Let's go get this W in Week 12. So for Freedman, for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.